like to kick off our MG drug development roundtable discussion with our moderator, Dr. Jeff Guptill, and all of our panelists. Thank you all so much for being with us today.
Great, thanks, Nicole. So this is an exciting part of the program today. We get to hear from a mixed group of researchers, as well as a caregiver for MG patients, as well as some professionals working in the field to develop the new therapies for myasthenia that are on the horizon now. So I think maybe I'll just let each person introduce themselves individually. And so first on the list that I have here is Dr. Narayamaswamy, who we heard from a little bit earlier. Pushpa, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Jeff. That was an excellent presentation, by the way, this morning. It really covered a lot of detail. I really enjoyed it. I just wanted to say that first before I introduce myself. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here this morning or afternoon or evening or whatever time it is anywhere. I'm Pushpa Narayamaswamy. I'm a neuromuscular neurologist. I have an interest in myasthenia gravis. I am the Vice Chair of Clinical Services and Associate Professor of Neurology at the Harvard Medical School, and it's affiliated, one of the affiliated hospitals, which is Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boston. Happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Great, thank you, Pushpa. Next is Fran Puryear.
Hi, I'm Fran. I have two children that have myasthenia gravis. I have my son, Jack, who's 15, and I have Maddie, who's 13. Jack was diagnosed at 5. Maddie was diagnosed at 3. They're both seronegative. You know, we've done all the testing for congenital myasthenic syndrome. You know, they thrive. They do really well. And, you know, we navigate our days and we do good.
Great. And can you maybe tell us like what type of treatments that they're taking? Just because this is,
sure.
That
Sorry.
may be helpful in the context of we're talking about drug development.
Yep.
So
sorry. So Jack currently is on Mestinon only, and Mestinon doesn't work for Maddie, nor do steroids. And so that's where we are at that point right now.
Great, thank you. So next is Omar Sino from UCB Biopharma.
Thanks, Dr. Guptill. So yes, I am Omar Sino. I'm a physician by training, and I am the U.S. medical lead for rare disease at UCB. UCB has a long history of working in immunology and neurology, and we are now making a strong push in contributing to rare disease.
Great, thank you, Omar. And Deb Gelinas from Argenx.
Hi, I'm Deborah Gelinas. I'm a neuromuscular neurologist, and I'm the head of medical affairs in the I'm the head of medical affairs in the U.S. in neurology for Argenx.
Great, and I guess maybe I'll just add, you know, for UCB, like they have 2 drugs in development for myasthenia. One is that FcRn class that reduces the antibodies in the circulation, and the second is a complement inhibitor. And Argenx is working on one of the FcRn inhibitors to remove antibodies from the circulation. So thank you all for being here. So we'll just kick this off. We'll get some. It
looks like Dr. Rampal from Alexion is also on. Jeff.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Nishi. I'm sorry. I didn't realize you had made it.
Actually, I've made it, but unfortunately, I'm having some challenges with my video. So for the moment, I seem audio only. But if you guys can hear me well, Dr. Guptill and Dr. Narayamaswamy and the rest of the panel, I'll just briefly introduce myself. I'm a neurologist, and I work at Alexion and support a number of our MG efforts.
Great, thank you, Nishi. I apologize. I didn't see that you that you had joined us. And Alexion has developed the first complement inhibitor that's made it to the market, and has a couple other products in development for myasthenia as well. Okay, so we'll get started. So the first question for the group is, and we'll have everyone kind of give their opinion on this, are what are the biggest challenges in MG drug development? And I think this is a great question to lead off with, because it people, depending on where you sit in the drug development process and MG research, you probably have a different perspective on the challenges that are there. So anyone want to start that off?
Sure. I'm sorry, Deborah, did I cut you off?
No problem.
You know, I think one of the challenges is, you know, myasthenia gravis is rare, not ultra rare, but regardless, there are not as many patients to participate in clinical trials. And if you look at MG symptomatology, of course, you have to consider fatigability, you have to consider distance and access to sites, making sure the sites are organized enough that you can have the individual be there in the morning as opposed to afternoon, for example. And making sure that sometimes another big challenge is not having a large number of sites or backup sites. So really making sure that there's the infrastructure and accommodation for the participants.
Great, thank you. Deb, do you want to add something to that?
I would. I think one of the biggest challenges in clinical research is trying to be respectful of the needs of the patient, while at the same time designing a trial so that you can get the answer you need. So, you know, some of the questions that came up about including patients who are seronegative, that's a risk when you include patients who are seronegative, because you don't know how they'll behave. Although I have to say we took that risk at Argenx. Another issue is, how restrictive are you with regard to the medications patients are allowed to be on? Patients naturally don't want to come off of medications that may be helping them. And yet the gold standard is always to have a placebo-controlled trial. A third risk, of course, as came up, is pediatric patients. At what stage can you test children with disease? You don't want to test them before you have a clear safety established for adults. And so that's always the next stage. So many of the real challenges, I think, are natural challenges where you have to balance what's in the interest of the patient and the patient's family, and what's in the interest of the company. And you have to make sure that you're respectful of both, and that you're not just going for broke, going for the answer, which isn't fair.
Great, thanks, Deb. Anyone else want to ask about that? Nishi, we can see you.
Yeah, it's great to be in the land of the living, you know. So actually, I agree with what everyone has already said. Having just wrapped up a global trial in MG, I also think we need to be cognizant of all of the factors we had, but also now living with the pandemic. I think we recognize that the face of medicine is changing. Telehealth is changing, and maybe some of our assessments need to modify and change along with them, and design studies that, you know, as everyone has talked about, bring us the highest quality data so that we can bring treatments to as many patients as possible, but also have a schedule of activities that's really patient-centric, and that really allows, you know, an achievable partnership so that we continue to have great data, not just through the randomized control period, but patients can benefit from an open label extension and other treatments along the way. So I also think it's time to get creative for the drug designers and developers for trials, and think about how we can have novel and new approaches to allow great studies to continue in an ever-changing landscape of medicine.
That's great. So we've heard a lot of consensus around, you know, design of trials that reduce the burden on patients. So make it more inclusive. Yeah, Pushpa?
So thank you. I think all of those comments are so much on the mark. I'll just add a couple of things to add to Jeff's talk. Jeff, you mentioned the heterogeneity of myasthenia gravis. You mentioned about how it's a snowflake disease. And so I think part of that, the challenge in a clinical trial, where we want a fairly uniform population so we can actually compare changes in that uniform population because we are doing it as a group, the heterogeneity or the inherent variability of myasthenia gravis becomes an issue. That can be challenging. The other issue is, so in addition to being rare, it's also different. So it's a rare disease and people are different, so that makes it doubly challenging. I think another issue is the outcome measures that we use. We've talked about sort of modifying the outcome measures themselves in the realm of being able to apply them virtually, etc. But I think one of the issues still remains that we probably need to develop better outcome measures. These are great measures, they've been validated, but as these treatments, the treatments that we have are quick treatments. All of these are exciting because they seem to have effect fairly quickly. And I think we need more sensitive measures, both physician reported, and I think a lot of your work and the work from NeuroNext will give us some biomarkers which we can actually use in trials to look at response, because it's difficult now to actually quantify the response. And finally, I'll say one more thing. Deb, you alluded to this. One of the challenges is in including women of childbearing age who are pregnant, who are lactating, so that we don't know the data. And that's extremely important in the clinical arena because we treat these patients. We treat women who want to get pregnant, who are pregnant. So I think that becomes a challenge.
Yeah, great points, Pushpa. Yeah, and the outcome measures, as I think where we're going to head in the future is that, a lot of these studies are focused on a specific group of MG patients, right? These are patients that have generalized disease, they have limb weakness, and we're going to have, I think, several therapies that are on the market to help those patients. And then we're going to be in a situation where there's still going to be lots of patients out there that don't have a medicine that really has evidence base for them. Like I'm thinking specifically of patients with ocular MG, lots of eye problems, eye symptoms, and we don't have good outcome measures to really study that population in an effective way. So to deliver on new therapies for that patient group, like Nishi mentioned, we're going to have like some pretty creative ways to develop new outcome measures to help, investigate these other subgroups of patients, more sensitive outcome measures, like you mentioned. So I'll just add one other point to this too, is the other thing that we're seeing is that because there are so many treatments in development is that there's a lot of competition for patients to participate in the trials. And if we think about where these studies have been done, and traditionally they've been concentrated in specific academic centers who have accumulated significant patient populations and experience with outcome measures and with the clinical trials. But as there's been more trials available, a lot of the companies need to use additional clinical sites to recruit patients that have not traditionally been part of a lot of MG research in the past. So, and I think that poses a distinct challenge too in terms of training people on these outcome measures, which have a lot of nuances associated with them, and training the clinical research personnel to be able to do the studies effectively and get good data. So,
Jeffrey, if I could just, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Nishi.
I was just going to add to that. It's not only important to expand past academic centers and into the community, but also bring the diversity into our clinical trials. So, I think there are benefits to having a wider reach and a larger catchment area where more patients have access to potential trials. And as you said, And as Dr. Narayana Swami said, that it is a snowflake disease, and there are various, challenges, and patients are presenting in different ways. But I think it's really important for us to have trials that reflect the patients that we serve, and that includes really a broad mix of our patient population. So we end up sometimes with unfortunate disparities along lines of race, maybe less so with gender. And I think it's a great opportunity to expand, not just in the community, but make sure we reach all portions of our patients that need to be served. Sorry, Dr. Narayanaswamy.
No, you just read my mind, perhaps. You said pretty much what I was talking about, sort of expanding a theme that Jeff brought up in terms of going out. And then you said what I wanted to say.
Great point. Fran, anything else that you wanna add to this, or maybe we can?
No, I mean, you guys have covered a lot of the issues with being in the pediatric world. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's, the pediatric issues. It's great to see that there are now trials that are starting in that area. Like Deb said, like there's a lot. I don't even think we can go into all of that with the pediatric space, but there are a lot of challenges with moving into there, which Deb, kind of highlighted some of the major ones in starting that effort. But we definitely need to go there in the future.
And I'm blown away, like in the past 4 to 5 years, at how much pediatric stuff is out there now.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, well, maybe we can start the next question with you, Fran, actually. So how do you think is an effective way to get more MG patients and families involved in clinical trials or accelerating the drug treatments out there?
So I'm a small business owner, and I'm 52 years old, and I've had to embrace social media more than before. I think there's an untapped area as far as reaching people. I do run a group on Facebook. It's a I run the MG Parents Facebook group. And anytime we find something, we share it there. We ask each other questions. There's also a pediatric myasthenia gravis page as well. It's phenomenal too. There's also, one of our parents has started a Facebook page that is, let me see, I wrote it down. It's for it's kids and teens with myasthenia gravis, because my kids are now teenagers, and there's not really a whole lot of stuff out there for them. But I think it's more of just like building community and getting the word out that these studies are going on. I'll honestly say in the past couple of years, I've had to step away from the MG world as far as like keeping up with all the trials and everything. My parents got sick, and a lot of these things I didn't know about, and usually I keep on top of things, but some of these trials and different things, the information is hard to find. I go on MDA sites and different sites, but a lot of other parents, they don't, and it's not because they don't know how. It's just like maybe they don't have the time, or maybe it's overwhelming. Maybe it's too, maybe it's presented in a medical way. Yeah.
Great. So you mentioned the MDA website that you get information for. Are there other websites that you've used to get information?
I mostly usually look at the MDA website, or I do a Google search and I may come across just a random thing that comes up. Let me see here. And a lot of it, though, honestly, is word of mouth from other parents. To be truthful, we really support each other a lot. And it's, a lot of it is like, hey, did you hear about this study? No, I didn't. What's going on with it? And we just, we share information, and, like we're our own little community.
Great. Yeah, so I think that the social media aspect of it is something that can clearly, send information like pretty far flung pretty easily in a way. So I think you're right. I think that is a good way to reach people.
Using the right hashtags, using the right SEOs. I mean, sadly, we're a TikTok world lately. And, I think there's some areas that just aren't being tapped.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So maybe we can talk. I think it maybe
for one last comment. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Pushpa.
If that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Fran, you bring up such a great point. On the one hand, as a researcher, and Nishi knows this, very well, we struggle to recruit patients. We just it's rare. It's a rare disease. It's hard to find patients. And then, as we already said, we have very strict criteria in these trials. We struggle to recruit patients. And on the other hand, it's such a great point that you brought that, the information is not out there. And if it's out there, it's not clearly sort of tailored to you, to what you want to know, how to understand it, how to read it, how to decide whether you want to go ahead. So I think you bring up such a great point. That's a real disconnect right there for all of those trials that we should really take into account. Thank you.
Thanks. One additional thing that I think we often don't think of, but I know in my own clinic, you can ask your physician, you can ask your neurologist if that neurologist can help you find a research trial. Even if that particular institution isn't participating, neurologists generally know how to get on clinicaltrials.gov. They can find trials that are enrolling, trials that are in your geographic area, and you can ask at your office for your physician to help you find a trial along with the patient organization. So I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, we can, but here comes the other caveat with that. Sometimes our neurologist, it's hard to get a hold of because that neurologist is extremely busy. Not extreme, in an emergency, easy to get a hold of, but it's something that, yes, I could bring up at my next 6-month appointment. Yeah, so you can ask, but sometimes some of our MG specialist neurologists, are busy.
I think you're actually pointing out some real challenges here to add to the conversation, so it would be nice maybe as a lessons learned for those of us on the other side of this, is there a place where we could have a one-stop shop, not just CT going to a .gov, a clinicaltrial.gov website, because that is very hard to search through and navigate unless you specifically know what you're looking for. But having, kind of one-stop shopping so that yourself, family members, patients can easily access. I think also additionally, just frankly speaking, it's a challenge because even when clinical trials are listed, you only get a fragment of the information out there. So you're still not entirely sure what the inclusion and exclusion criteria may be. So I do think we need to have better connectivity at this place. And I think you're talking about that through social media. Mm-hmm. You're working on that on your side, but I think there's a responsibility for those of us on the drug discovery side to mirror your efforts. And I hope that that's a takeaway that comes from this. How can we utilize and have one place where individuals can navigate and learn more about pediatric MG trial and drug discovery?
Yeah, that would be amazing. And let me go back to when I was like, the neurologist is busy. What I mean, and let me explain it a little bit better, is when I call my pediatrician, they forward me, I can leave a message with the charge nurse and I get a call back like within the day. Sometimes it does take our neurologists to get back, more time to get back to us. That's all I was trying to say.
No
yeah, it's like, it's not as easy.
We understand. There can be delays.
Yeah,
that's for sure. So I think, I don't know, for the group that's, attending this, the participant group here, I mean, maybe it's worth just spending a little bit of time to talk about where to find information because, it seems like that's a gap right now. So like clearly the MDA website is a place to go that has information on clinical trials. And they also have a nice section that talks about different types of clinical trials, what they are, what participation is like. So I think that's helpful information. And then there are other like patient advocacy groups that try to collate this information and make awareness for patients. So one that I work with is the Myasthenia Gravis Foundation of America, which is myasthenia.org, and they have a list of the clinical trials that are active, and that the goal is to present the information in a way that's patient-centric rather than for researchers. The National Organization for Rare Diseases, NORD, is another organization that has interest in a broad range of rare diseases like MDA, that also has information on the clinical trials. I do agree clinicaltrials.gov is a great resource, but it is not easy to navigate unless you've worked with it for a while, and it can come across as pretty technical to me. But that's another one. Any other resources that people can think of that would be good to help right now? But maybe this is a good action point that we need to think about a little bit more. Are we doing this effectively?
I found that myastheniagravisnews.com is actually a really, really good resource for a couple of reasons. It gives obviously the latest news, but it also has a tab where it goes over all the different standard of care medications, what's coming out. And then there are different levels of intensity with the type of information. There's a nice overview but then you have links to the general papers depending on, how deep you want to go. And it not only covers the clinical side of things, but also, or the development side of things, but really provides a ton of resources for patients and families and caregivers. And that runs the gamut, whether it be trial sites, how to cope with day-to-day activities psychologically, recipes that potentially can help with boosting the immune system. So I really, really like that. It's consistently a good place. And they now have forums as part of their weekly distribution list, which is really nice to read. And it's another way patients can interact with each other.
Another option to consider is if, as a patient, you're interested specifically, for instance, to find out about when a trial might be available in a pediatric population, or when something might be available for a woman of childbearing age. People don't maybe think of it, but all pharmaceutical companies that are doing research have medical information so that you can actually reach out to the company and you can say, I have a teenager with myasthenia gravis. Are you doing a trial in this age group? Can you connect me? And you will get a personalized response from the medical information part of the company, and they will gear you toward where that trial is going on. So that's another option. Again, social media is a curse and a blessing, but that's one area where you can utilize social media, go to the website, and actually ask a question directly to the company of the compound that you may be interested in.
Wow, thank you, Deborah. I'm going to actually share that with my parents.
Actually, I wanted to add also to what Deborah just said. So I think that's a great idea. And just if we take a step back, if there's an ongoing adult trial that is successful, then there will be a pediatric commitment to have a trial. That is part of the partnership that we have with drug discovery and working with the FDA. And it actually makes good sense for all the reasons, Fran, that you're raising, which is this is a high degree of unmet need. And so having a win in the adult column is great, but you still really need to do the research to allow access to go all the way into the pediatric population. So if we look at that kind of trajectory of drug discovery, the success in the adult space means there will be a pediatric commitment with the FDA if we're just focusing on kind of our US space. And so I think you should be aware of that. So if you say, as Jeffrey raised, that there are going to be all these great therapies that are coming down the pike, they will have pediatric commitments as well. So I think if you combine both of those approaches, reaching out to the companies that are most active, and knowing that they will have pediatric commitments, you will probably be one of the first people to learn about the start of new pediatric studies.
Great, thank you.
Okay, great. So this is a great discussion. So maybe next question we can go over. So what about, what do you guys consider to be the most like exciting developments in the MG like research world now? So this is kind of a loaded question. Maybe I try not to get like a biased answer, because I'm sure all of you are all deeply engaged and very passionate about your products that you're exciting. So I don't know if there's maybe a general way to respond to that particular question.
Well, I think, I'm sorry, Deborah, I've interrupted you like twice. I think we can all say that it's exciting to have targeted therapies, right? We have one in eculizumab, but we're all working on new targeted therapies after a long time with symptomatic care. So that's something that I think we could all say is very exciting.
Absolutely. Yep,
I think it's also exciting that initiatives like the MGNet initiative and the Promise initiative, and the fact that MG is on the radar now. MG for years and years was a disease that we kind of treated with things that were already out because they were tested in other disease states. But now MG is on the radar. The varieties of antibody involvement in MG are on the radar. So it's really a time of great discovery and great, I think, progress for patients with MG.
Yeah, that's great. Nishi, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I actually think, obviously I work very closely in the complement landscape and launched, eculizumab in this space and work in the complement landscape. But I think the truth is that there are a lot of great novel therapies because we're understanding more about the disease of MG. And I think that's great. There are leaps forward in our understanding of the disease state and what we can achieve. And I think actually it's a great opportunity because MG is such a variable disease. It is such a heterogeneous group of diseases. So having multiple therapeutic options and targeted therapies, I think are going to be great opportunities for patients to have relief from their MG symptoms. And let's bring the bar down to minimal manifestations. I think that's also really important as we move forward, not just living with a baseline level of very limiting disease, but move that as close to minimal manifestation as possible. And so I think the competition, the new targets, is absolutely great for the patients I care for and the entire disease space. So I think it is really a dawn really in the MG space. We didn't have any FDA new approved drug for 60 years, and that is going to change in quick succession.
Yeah, I think that there have been a couple like major developments that have really gotten us to this point. One is, as you mentioned, Nishi, is understanding the disease better, but then like from the pharmaceutical side of things, just the explosion in technology in terms of engineering that has really made it possible to do some of the things that were not possible 10 years ago in terms of designing drugs and to have characteristics that you want in order to be effective, but also as safe as possible. So, yeah, great.
Yeah, I just add to that, all of these are great points. I just add to that, we've known about complement and how it causes myasthenia gravis for years, right? But nothing happened until now. So, and I really think it's that space of immunology, developments in immunology, monoclonal antibodies. So sort of, as you said, the ability to target those to get these kinds of development of these kinds of treatments. And those advances have actually just helped us. And then I think having learned about immunology on the whole, we have now sort of taken therapies from other areas, oncology, for instance, CAR T therapies, which are now being studied in myasthenia gravis. So we're able to sort of cast that wide net, and your drugs themselves, I mean, are approved for the same sort of mechanism of action is approved for more than one drug. So I think it's that broad overall, it's not just the understanding of myasthenia gravis, it's the understanding of immune-mediated diseases overall and the approach to them and the ability to have the technology to develop those approaches.
I think that's actually one of the most exciting things in neurology today is the appreciation that the neurologic system is not exempt from the immune system. Mm-hmm. Diseases like ALS today, where we're appreciating they're not just neurodegenerative, but they're immunologically active. And myasthenia is the sort of poster child of an immunologically active disease. But I think we're going to see many MDA diseases where the role of the immune system is further elucidated and where treatments are going to be increasingly available. So I think it really is a golden age for research.
Yeah, and it goes even beyond neurology, right? I mean, we're talking paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria on the one hand and myasthenia on the other. So it goes even beyond neurology. It's almost, you could call this a whole thing, a development in immunology rather than any specific.
It is, yeah. I was just thinking the same thing. Is that, yeah, our understanding of the immune system, it has really been like kind of the key driver of a lot of these new therapies. You think about that in contrast to neurodegenerative diseases, where we don't have a very good understanding of them still, but the immune system, we have a great understanding now of how it works. Obviously lots more to learn, but major advancements over the past 10 to 20 years. So, all right, I'm gonna do something that I've been asked this question to me. Now I have the opportunity to turn it around on the industry folks here. So where do you see, and Dr. Narayamaswamy can also chime in on this, and Fran as well. Where do you see MG treatment in, say, 5 to 10 years? What do you think that's going to look like compared to where we're at now?
So I think, you know, we're going to have, I think there's going to be a better understanding of the individual patients. We know the diversity of MG patients. Every patient is different. So understanding how the molecules are working now, understanding how they individually work in different patient populations, combining with things down the road like IL-6 agonists, and just keep, you know, expanding the group of molecules involved and really trying to stratify those patient groups better. And it's on us to really, and, you know, partnership and collaboration to really figure out the nitty-gritty of each subset of patients and treat accordingly.
So more targeted treatments based on subgroup characteristics of particular patients to select therapies for them.
Well, that's one aspect of it, absolutely. But as we are moving into targeted therapy for the broader population of MG, I think down the road there's going to be even more specificity in understanding the patients better, and then we can target as well as such.
And I think what we'll see is earlier and earlier targeted therapy, so that patients won't wait until they're refractory before they're being offered targeted therapies. But I think that we'll see intervention earlier in the treatment paradigm with therapies that really can make a difference for patients. And hopefully then patients won't have to suffer the comorbidities and the tolerability effects of some of the drugs that they've been on up until this point.
Yeah, I was gonna, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was actually gonna agree with you, Deborah. I was thinking the same thing, that, you know, right now patients have a long journey. They have a long journey to their diagnosis, and I think we all know that. And they have a long journey to get to a targeted therapy. And I think that is likely to change because the side effect profile, a patient-centric model, really needs to come forward. It's complicated because there are payer components and all these other aspects. But I do think targeted therapies are going to move earlier on in the disease course. I also think that we will have potentially new opportunities in the rescue world. And I think that's also important to say, that it's not just changes that are happening across the disease landscape for chronic therapy, and hopefully early targeted chronic therapy avoids the side effect profile, but maybe even changes the disease course, or there's a disease modification aspect of that hopefully we glean over time. But I also think rescue therapies are also changing. And 5 years from now, I think we're going to look at what we've been reliant on for the longest time and realize we have other things in our arsenal. I think, Pushpa, you wanted to add something.
Yeah, right. So it's two separate boxes right here. So part of it is the understanding of immunology, which will continue broadly, across fields. That's sort of cross-cutting across fields, and it will continue. And therefore therapies that come from that understanding. But the other part of it is to continue to understand what drives myasthenia gravis. And as Omar said, some of this heterogeneity in the disease. And Dr. Guptill is doing some work on this, on identifying biomarkers. Then the NeuroNext also is part of that identification of biomarkers. So mRNA profiles of lymphocytes in the blood, specific blood types in the blood, that sort of tell us more about these patients, and perhaps also more about what medications they're likely to respond to. So almost, if you will, precision medicine, you sort of see it. Now, I don't know where the money for all of this is going to come from, and that's a completely different question. But I think we are moving towards an era where, the algorithm of myasthenia gravis treatment as it is now is going to look very different in 5 years, I think.
I just add one more thing to that. I think we haven't talked about the role of technology here a lot, and I do think wearables and devices are going to become part of how we should consider trial development, and how treating physicians may also glean a lot of information. So not just reliance on, as you said, Pushpa, these assessment tools that are validated, and so we have them, but they have their gaps and challenges. I do think we have the opportunity with wearable devices to really understand what has improved in a patient's quality of life, how they're living with MG. And I do think there are other opportunities through various devices that are going to become part of care over the next coming years that I think are going to be a great opportunity to quickly change treatments that are ineffective and also help drive clinical trial parameters.
I think that you're absolutely right. And I think COVID kind of forced us into exploring that area. And I can honestly say that in some of the other trials that we're doing, we are absolutely looking at remote, portable, virtual devices to monitor patients so that we don't have to have patients come into the clinic for a research visit, so that we can actually be obtaining a lot of information right in the patient's home as the patient is living their life. And I totally agree with you.
It really emphasizes trying to make things more patient-centric, right? Yeah. Okay. So we have there's still some questions in the Q&A. So so one of them here is about seronegative patients. We've kind of alluded to this, but there's a directed question on how these treatments would work for seronegative patients, the ones that we've talked about. Anyone want to tackle those?
I'd like to jump in here. As I mentioned, we've included seronegatives in our ADAPT trial. So we're waiting to hear what the FDA will say on that. I want to just say, because seronegatives represent such a small proportion of the MG patient population, it's hard to actually enroll enough patients who are seronegative status to be able to have a statistically significant answer. So that often, even in our trial, we see trends of improvement, and we know that for the most part, seronegative patients behave in a way that is similar to the antibody, pathologic antibody patients, but it's harder to really make that level of evidence. And so I think that we're going to have to see how the FDA views that kind of rather incomplete evidence in these ultra rare conditions where it's hard to actually enroll enough patients to say, I proved it beyond a doubt.
Yeah, so that's an excellent point, Deb. And I think the experience that your company, Argenx, is going through right now is going to be very illustrative for how this is going to work in the future. So on the one hand, yeah, will the FDA like accept that you're seeing trends of similar improvement in the seronegative population to the point where they will allow seronegative patients to be included like in the label for treating the MG or not? And you know, I'm hopeful, as I think we all are, that these therapies will be, you know, available to as broad a population as possible, where there's reason to think that it would be helpful for them, which I think most of us would include, you know, seronegative patients for FcRn inhibitors. It's a great point.
I think one of the other issues with seronegative patients is the difficulty in actually identifying them in a trial setting, because we do have strict criteria, as you know, in terms of diagnosis, and the antibody positive patients may be slightly easier to diagnose if we have the antibodies. Sometimes seronegative patients, as some of you may have experienced in the audience, can be difficult to diagnose. The diagnosis time for seronegative patients tends to be longer than it is for antibody positive patients, and it can be difficult. So then recruitment of this rare population becomes even more difficult in the study setting. So that becomes another challenge. So if you have a rare disease, it's hard to diagnose. It's a small subgroup of that rare disease. And you know, you have to get those patients into the study, and then you have that small number, which then affects the results, the precision of the results. So it's a huge problem. But you know, I think you have to be congratulated on the fact that we're jumping in there into the seronegative water and trying to make sense of it, and you know, come up with treatments, because we do believe, I mean, at the end of the day, that it is an autoimmune disease, and there are antibodies, as you said. We are just not detecting, and the pool of seronegative patients drops as more and more antibodies are identified. So
we're almost out of time. There are two more questions I'd like to get to. One was about the risks of including seronegative patients in clinical trials. And so maybe I can start just to address that one, and then people can add on to it, and then hopefully we can have one more question. So I think what we're trying to say for the seronegative patients is that there are two, in my mind, 2 to 3 main considerations for including the seronegative patients in the trial. So one is what Deb mentioned, which is just the number that are out there, and to have a number of seronegative patients that's sufficient to prove conclusively that a medicine works for them is difficult to do. And there are some ways to address that. Number 2, the other risk is that it is unfortunately true that a lot of a fair number of patients who have been diagnosed with seronegative myasthenia gravis in fact do not have the disease. They have something else that is causing symptoms that are confused with myasthenia. And so the risk there is, if you include those patients in clinical trials, is that you can get a false result. It could potentially say that the medicine doesn't work for patients with myasthenia, and that's actually not true. It's just because the trial included patients that don't have myasthenia. And if we were really confident about the diagnosis of seronegative MG, that the medicine could have worked. So there's this very important point of, if you're going to include seronegative MG patients in the trials, how do you feel really confident that the patients have myasthenia that you're including? And then finally, it's the unknown factor of it, right? Is that because seronegative patients have not been included in clinical trials in the past, there's some risk to moving to that population because you don't know how they're going to respond. It's much less risky to continue to study acetylcholine receptor antibody positive patients because we know how they, or we have more data in terms of how we would expect them to respond. But as has been mentioned several times, to the, to complement the pharmaceutical companies, when it's appropriate, the push has been now to really move into that group, to take some risk and to really try to answer these questions for that patient subgroup. Anyone else want to add to that? Okay. So do you think we have time for one more question, or do you think do we need to stop, Nicole?
You could go ahead and take that last one.
Okay. Okay, so one more question here, and this is a common one, is that, so I'm just going to read it. So new therapies on the horizon are exciting, but often inaccessible due to extremely high costs of newly developed drugs. Even when there are treatments that will work better and with fewer side effects, insurers won't cover them, or if they do, the copays make them unaffordable. Even so, what are companies doing to try to make these therapies accessible?
First thing that I think it's important to do is for a company to responsibly price a drug so that they're not pricing a drug that is really prohibitive, because we do have to, as Dr. Narayanaswamy mentioned, we really do have to be conscious of the fact that not only does a company want to make money, but you don't want to bankrupt the whole healthcare system in the US while you're doing it. So I think that's the first thing. And then the second thing is to make sure that you have patient programs available so that for particular patient groups who don't have full access to the best payer coverage, that you actually have assistance programs in place. And that's something that I think all pharmaceutical companies strive for. But I have to say that responsible pricing is really the linchpin that has to happen in the future.
Any other comments on that?
I would also add to that it's a complex space because it allows for additional drug discovery, and I think that's very hard in a space where there was no new therapy for 60 years. I absolutely think our patients should have access to the best therapies, and when you have restrictions from the payer that don't match the label, that in fact is also another layer of frustration that can happen. So the label could provide for wide access, but then there are payer limitations. And I 100% agree that there should be accountability from start to finish. And that includes the pharmaceutical company all the way, to the patient receiving the therapy. So I think that, of course, is important. I do think that generics will also be available for certain medications, around the corner over time. And I also think the number of products that are in this space is also going to improve patient access dramatically. I genuinely believe that those improvements are going to happen, but it shouldn't just happen passively, because of multiple agents. It should be an active, deliberate process to ensure the best patient access and a pricing model that works for that. But I think it is a challenging relationship because you want to return the opportunity for new drug discovery. And, in my own organization, we, ventured into the ALS space. And there's a lot of risk with that. That study, unfortunately did not give us the result that we wanted. But I think it really goes to remind ourselves that when we have success in drug discovery, it really becomes the next step. We stand on the shoulders of that and try to go into another unmet need space. So I think it's very complicated. I genuinely believe that everybody should be accountable across the way.
And it is complicated, and research is expensive. There's no denying it. It's unbelievably expensive, but I still think it comes down to trying to be responsible as citizens and as pharmaceutical companies.
And one last thing, a very, very quick comment. on the topic of access, I think it's very important when appropriate and compliant to really make sure that the conversation with the payer is very, very well understood, and it's not taking things for granted that they understand the disease state, but under really, providing a certain lens of education and full 360-degree, explanation of the need, why we're doing this, and why it's incredibly important for these patients. The core of that, though, is not assuming, and I think starting that process early, building that relationship early, can have really, really important downstream effects.
And Jeff, if I could add one more thing, that it's also important for us to have holistic data that can show for some of these new and novel therapies the benefits to clinical deterioration or avoiding hospitalization or the ability to return to work, and the holistic improvement from a healthcare economics outcomes standpoint. And I think treatments that the pricing is obviously different than a corticosteroid, I think there are also opportunities for us to have more nuanced trial design so that we have that data available to say, you know what, this treatment is going to keep your patient out of the hospital. This treatment is maybe going to allow your patient to return to work. And I think it behooves us to collect that complete picture of data so that we can have stronger arguments, like you're saying, Omar, with the payers.
I think that's absolutely true. Payers want to assure that they're offering their patient population good care, and yet the payer has to always balance out the cost benefit. And so it really does, then the obligation comes to us to demonstrate that value of that treatment to the payer for the payer's population. Absolutely.
Okay, we're almost out of time. I'm gonna have one more question because we have one open Q&A thing, and I'm a completer. I like to finish things. So, and I'll start the answer to this, and we'll let people jump in on this too. So it's, can you speak on the potential long-term or permanent damage of neuromuscular receptors from delay in treatment or insufficient treatment? This is a great question. It's a complicated one. I'll just start off by saying, like, we actually don't know a whole lot about this topic. How the body's ability to recover from long-term chronic damage that occurs with complement deposition and antibody attack on the muscle. However, what we can say is that we know that a lot of patients improve with our treatments even many years after they've been diagnosed. And I think, what we've seen through the recent clinical trials, and actually starting, I would say, with Alexion, was that there actually seems to be good reason to believe that even long after someone's had MG and has had chronic symptoms, despite being treated for a number of years, is that there still is a potential to improve. If we look back at the data from a lot of the recent industry trials, most of the patients that are enrolled have had the disease for many years and have been, treated, but, unfortunately not had resolution of their symptoms. And then with participation in the trials, we're still seeing that these patients improve. So we don't understand a lot of the mechanisms involved for why patients improve or how they improve directly after treatment. But I think there's certainly hope that even if you haven't responded to a treatment for a long time after your diagnosis, is that these new treatments, have the potential to be effective for you as well. Anyone want to add to that?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, right?
Yep.
And if we understand that pathophysiology and really understand if, comparing to how much improvement we have, if it's down the road versus if it's earlier, and if the degree of progression of damage, I'm making a statement because I don't have the answer to it, but it's just something, I think we would all be incredibly happy if we had the answer to that.
I've actually tried to theoretically design this trial in my mind. So, what we do know, and I think, Jeff, you hit the nail on the head, it's very limited, but we do have, even electron microscopy, photos that show the damage of EM, the damage of myasthenia at the neuromuscular junction. We can see complement deposition. We can see loss of receptors. We can see those things. I mean, from a clinician scientist perspective, I would love to be able to have a muscle biopsy, see the damage, treat a patient, and then have a muscle biopsy and see restoration of the ultrastructure at the neuromuscular junction. Except that study is not a feasible study because we would be subjecting people to muscle biopsies for the purpose of understanding the pathophysiology, and that's what the assessment tools are for. I have then thought about kind of more interesting ways of getting at this data, and I haven't been able to find an approach. And I think this is a great place for collaboration because everybody wants to find a way, like an assessment tool, everybody wants to find a way to understand the repair cycle at the neuromuscular junction. Everybody would benefit from having that experience. What I can say is, I have been able to develop the, champion trial. I have not been able to develop this trial despite thinking about it for a number of years. So, but I'm open to learning from my peers along the way.
But what we know is what you said, Jeff, which is that in all of our trials, we're enrolling patients who have sometimes 10+ years of myasthenia gravis, who have MG-ADL scores that are high and that show that they have a significant amount of disability, patients who have been tried on multiple medications, patients who have had crises in the past, and really we're still demonstrating they respond to therapy. So clearly there is a great recuperative capacity of muscle, of acetylcholine receptors, and in myasthenia gravis in general. And I think that that's one of the wonderful things about having a peripheral nervous system disease where there is more possibility for healing and recuperation.
Absolutely. Okay, well, this has been an outstanding discussion, very, very interesting, great questions from the attendees, and I really appreciate the attendance and participation from our panelists, world experts on drug development in myasthenia. So I'm very fortunate to have this group come together on behalf of the MDA. So thank you all very much.